The billionaire froze mid-sentence when he noticed the black single dad eating alone, because the kid beside him wasn't touching his food. Before we begin, let me ask you something simple. Have you ever felt judged in a room before anyone knew your story? Hold on to that thought. Now, let me take you to a quiet restaurant on a Tuesday night. The place was called Harbor and Pine. It sat just off the waterfront in Baltimore, the kind of restaurant people chose for anniversaries and promotions. Soft lights, white tablecloths, a piano playing low enough to be felt more than heard. Darren Cole almost didn't come. He stood outside for a moment with his hand on the door, reading the small gold letters again, like the name might change if he looked hard enough. Harbor and Pine. Inside, laughter spilled out in gentle waves. The smell of butter and grilled fish drifted through the glass. "Daddy," a small voice said. Darren looked down. His son, Isaiah, held his hand with both of his. 6 years old. Too quiet for his age tonight. His tie was crooked, the knot too big, like Darren's fingers hadn't quite gotten it right. "You okay?" Darren asked. Isaiah nodded. "I'm just hungry." Darren smiled. "Then let's eat." They stepped inside. Heads turned. Not all at once. Not obviously. Just enough. Darren felt it the way you feel a change in temperature. A pause. Quick look. Then eyes sliding away. He was used to that. A black man in a tailored but slightly worn suit. A child beside him. No entourage. No loud confidence. Just careful steps and quiet manners. The hostess smiled politely. "Reservation?" "Yes," Darren said. "For two." "Cole." She scanned the list, then looked up again. Her smile tightened just a bit. "Right this way." They were led past tables where men in pressed jackets leaned back in their chairs, where women laughed softly over wine. Darren caught fragments of conversation, stocks, travel, real estate. Isaiah squeezed his hand again. "It's fancy," Isaiah whispered. "I know," Darren said. "You're doing great." They were seated near the wall. Not the worst table. Not the best. Darren pulled out Isaiah's chair and helped him sit. "Thank you," Isaiah said, serious. Darren swallowed. That thank you had come too easily. Across the room, a man stood near the piano, glass raised. Leonard Hale didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. He had that kind of presence. Silver hair, calm smile, the ease of someone who had never worried about a bill being declined. The billionaire founder of Hale Industries was in town for a charity board dinner, surrounded by people who laughed just a little too quickly at his jokes. "To growth," Leonard said. Glasses clinked. He took a sip, and that's when he noticed them. Not because they were loud, because they weren't. The boy sat perfectly still, hands folded in his lap. His plate arrived, and he stared at it without touching a thing. Leonard frowned slightly. Children didn't act like that unless something was wrong. Back at the table, Darren studied the menu, pretending not to notice the prices. He had planned for this, saved for weeks. Tonight mattered. Isaiah's teacher had suggested they celebrate. Isaiah had read his first full chapter book on his own. Darren had promised dinner somewhere nice. So here they were. "What are you getting?" Darren asked. Isaiah shrugged. "Whatever you get." Darren smiled. "Nope. Tonight you choose." Isaiah stared at the menu, eyes wide. "Everything looks big." "That's okay," Darren said. "Big plates don't bite." Isaiah smiled faintly, then shook his head. "I'm not that hungry." Darren paused. "You sure?" Isaiah nodded quickly. Too quickly. Darren closed the menu. He knew that look. The waiter returned. Young, polite, distracted. "Ready to order?" Darren nodded. "I'll have the grilled salmon." "And for him?" "I don't want anything," Isaiah said softly. The waiter blinked. "You sure, buddy?" Isaiah nodded again. Darren felt the familiar tightening in his chest. "We'll just do one entree," Darren said. "And maybe some bread." The waiter hesitated, then wrote it down. "Of course." As he walked away, Darren leaned closer to Isaiah. "You don't have to be scared," he said quietly. "I'm not scared," Isaiah replied. Then, after a beat, "I don't want to mess it up." Darren's breath caught. "Mess what up?" Isaiah looked down at the table. The food. If I don't like it. Darren closed his eyes for half a second. Oh, buddy, he whispered. Across the room, Leonard watched. He wasn't trying to listen. He couldn't hear the words. But he recognized the posture. The father leaning in. The child shrinking back. Leonard had seen that posture in boardrooms, people afraid to take up space. He excused himself from his group. I'll be right back, he said. They barely noticed. The bread arrived. Warm. Smelling like comfort. Isaiah reached for a piece, then pulled his hand back. You can eat, Darren said gently. Isaiah tore off a small piece. Too small. Darren broke his own bread in half and slid it onto Isaiah's plate without a word. Isaiah looked up. Darren smiled. Bread tastes better shared. Isaiah nodded and ate. Slowly, like it might disappear if he rushed. Leonard stopped near their table, pretending to study a painting on the wall. He watched the father. The care. The restraint. This wasn't a man trying to impress. This was a man trying not to fail. Leonard felt something shift in his chest. He turned back toward his party, then stopped. No. He turned fully and walked over. Excuse me, Leonard said. Darren looked up, startled. Yes. Leonard smiled, warm and unforced. I hope I'm not interrupting. No, Darren said quickly. Not at all. Leonard glanced at Isaiah. That's a sharp tie you've got there. Isaiah straightened. Thank you. Leonard extended his hand to Darren. Leonard. Darren, he replied, shaking it. Pause followed. Not awkward. Curious. I couldn't help but notice, Leonard said carefully, that your son seems overwhelmed. Darren stiffened just slightly. He's just tired, Darren said. Leonard nodded. Makes sense. Long days are hard. Isaiah looked between them. Leonard crouched slightly so he was closer to Isaiah's eye level. What book did you read? Leonard asked. Isaiah blinked. How did you know? Leonard smiled. I have a grandson. Same look when he finishes a big one. Isaiah hesitated. It was about space. Leonard's eyes lit up. Space is hard. I still don't understand most of it. Isaiah smiled. A real one this time. The waiter returned with the salmon. Leonard glanced at the plate, then back at Darren. Mind if I make a small suggestion? Leonard asked. Darren hesitated. Sure. Leonard signaled the waiter. Could we add a kid's plate? Whatever he wants. My treat. Darren opened his mouth. That's not. Leonard raised a hand gently. Not charity, he said. Celebration. Darren froze. Leonard met his eyes. I saw the pride. It deserves a full plate. The room felt very still. People nearby were watching now. Isaiah looked at his dad. Unsure. Darren swallowed. Then nodded. Thank you. Leonard smiled. You're welcome. As the waiter walked away, Darren felt every eye in the room. Some curious. Some confused. Some uncomfortable. Leonard stood straight again. Enjoy your dinner, he said. And congratulations. For what? Darren asked. For making him feel safe, Leonard replied. He turned and walked back to his table. Whispers followed him. So did something else. Tension. Darren looked at Isaiah. Isaiah whispered, Daddy? Who was that? Darren shook his head slowly. I don't know. But his hands were trembling now, because something had shifted in the room, and he could feel it. This wasn't over. Not even close. Because the man who had just sat back down at that table was about to do something that would change the entire night. And everyone in the room was about to see it. The kid's plate arrived with steam still rising from it. Mac and cheese. Grilled chicken cut small. A few fries on the side. Isaiah stared at it like it might disappear. For you, the waiter said kindly. Isaiah looked at Darren again, waiting. Darren nodded. Go ahead, buddy. Isaiah picked up his fork and took a careful bite. Then another. Color came back to his face almost immediately. Darren let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Across the room, Leonard sat back down at his table. The conversation had stalled. One man leaned in. Do you know him? Leonard shook his head. No. Then why? Because I noticed, Leonard said simply. The man frowned. You're going to make people uncomfortable. Leonard smiled faintly. Good. At Darren's table, the tension didn't fade right away. He felt eyes on him now. Not the quick glances from before. Longer ones. Isaiah ate faster, then slower, like he was afraid someone might take the plate away. You okay? Darren asked. Isaiah nodded, mouth full. It's really good. Darren smiled, but his chest still felt tight. He hated needing help, even when it came without judgment. Especially then. A woman at a nearby table leaned toward her husband. Is that Leonard Hale? She whispered. The husband glanced over. Yeah. Why is he talking to that guy? I don't know, she said. But everyone's watching now. They weren't wrong. The room had shifted. This wasn't just dinner anymore. It was a moment. Leonard finished his drink and stood again. This time, he didn't go back to Darren's table right away. He walked to the piano and spoke quietly with the pianist. A moment later, the soft background music stopped. Conversations faded. Heads turned. Leonard cleared his throat. I won't take much time, he said, voice calm but steady. I know this wasn't planned. People leaned in. Darren froze. Isaiah looked up. Daddy. Darren placed a hand over his son's. It's okay. Leonard looked around the room. I spend a lot of time in places like this, he continued. Rooms full of people who look successful. A few smiles appeared. But success, Leonard said, isn't always loud. His eyes drifted briefly toward Darren and Isaiah. It's often quiet, careful, tired. The room was completely silent now. Darren felt heat creep up his neck. This wasn't what he wanted. He hadn't asked for attention. Leonard went on. Tonight, I saw a father teaching his son how to sit in a world that doesn't always make room for him. A few people shifted uncomfortably. I saw a child afraid to take up space, Leonard said. And I recognized that fear. Leonard paused. I grew up with it. That surprised some people. Surprised Darren too. Leonard took a breath. I'm not here to embarrass anyone, he said, including myself. A light chuckle passed through the room, easing the tension just slightly. But I want to remind us of something simple, Leonard said. Dignity should never depend on a price tag. No one spoke. Darren's throat tightened. Leonard nodded once, as if deciding something. Dinner's on me tonight, he said. For everyone. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone laughed softly in disbelief. Leonard raised a hand. Not because I can. He looked directly at Darren now. But because generosity should never feel like a spotlight. It should feel like warmth. The waiter froze mid-step. The manager rushed forward. Mr. Hale, that's... Leonard smiled. Handled. The room buzzed now. Voices overlapping. Chairs shifting. Darren sat frozen. Isaiah whispered, Daddy, did we do something wrong? Darren swallowed hard. No, he said quietly. We didn't. Leonard walked back over to their table. This time, people didn't pretend not to stare. He stopped beside Darren. I hope that was okay, Leonard said softly. Darren stood. You didn't have to do that, he said. I know, Leonard replied. Darren hesitated, then said, Thank you. Leonard nodded. You're welcome. Then, more quietly, May I sit? Darren blinked. Of course. Leonard pulled up a chair. The room watched. Leonard looked at Isaiah. How's the food? Isaiah smiled. Really good. Leonard grinned. Best review I've heard all night. Isaiah laughed. The sound cut through the room. People relaxed just a bit. Leonard turned to Darren. You're doing a good job. Darren's eyes burned. He looked down quickly. I'm just doing my best. That's usually what good looks like, Leonard said. A man from Leonard's table approached cautiously. Leonard, the board. It can wait, Leonard said without looking away. The man nodded and retreated. Leonard leaned back slightly. What do you do, Darren? Darren hesitated. I'm a bus mechanic. City Transit. Leonard nodded. Important work. Darren gave a small smile. Keeps people moving. Leonard met his eyes. Exactly. The manager returned, visibly nervous. Mr. Hale, some guests are asking. Leonard raised his hand. Tell them this. Tonight isn't about money. The manager nodded and left. Darren exhaled slowly. This is a lot, he said. Leonard smiled. It is. Isaiah looked between them. Are you famous? Leonard laughed. A little. Isaiah thought. Do you fix buses? Leonard laughed harder. No. I break spreadsheets. Isaiah nodded seriously. That sounds hard. Leonard wiped his eyes. It is. As dessert menus arrived, the room felt different. Lighter. People smiled at Darren now. Not politely, but warmly. A woman passed by and whispered, Your son is wonderful. Darren nodded, unsure what to say. Isaiah leaned over. Daddy, can I get dessert? Darren smiled. Yes, you can. Leonard stood once more. I should get back, he said. Darren stood too. Mr. Hale, Leonard, thank you for seeing us. Leonard looked at him carefully. I didn't just see you, he said. I recognized you. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a simple card. No gold. No flash. Call me, he said, placing it on the table. Not for favors. For coffee. Darren stared at the card, then nodded. Okay. Leonard smiled at Isaiah. Keep reading big books. Isaiah grinned. I will. Leonard returned to his table. The room slowly resumed its noise. But nothing was the same. As they left the restaurant later that night, Darren held Isaiah's hand tighter. The cool night air hit their faces. Daddy, Isaiah said, that was a good night. Darren looked down at him. Yes, he said. It was. But his heart was racing, because the card in his pocket felt heavier than paper. And something told him this dinner was only the beginning, because when someone that powerful notices you, they don't just walk away. And whatever came next would change far more than one night. The next morning felt unreal. Darren stood in his small kitchen in West Baltimore, staring at the coffee maker like it might explain what had happened the night before. Isaiah sat at the table in his school uniform, swinging his legs, humming softly. Daddy, Isaiah said, did that man really buy dinner for everyone? Darren poured coffee he barely wanted. Yeah, he did. Isaiah smiled. That was nice. It was, Darren said. But it was also unusual. Isaiah tilted his head. Is unusual bad? Darren paused. Not always. He checked the time. They were already late. At work, the bus depot smelled like oil and warm metal. Darren liked it there. It made sense. Engines didn't judge you. They either worked or they didn't. Hey, celebrity, a coworker called out. Darren froze. What? He asked. The guy held up his phone. You went viral, man. Darren's stomach dropped. The video wasn't long. Someone had filmed Leonard speaking. The part about dignity. The moment he paid the bill. The camera panned just briefly to Darren and Isaiah. The caption read, Billionaire humbles entire restaurant after noticing black single dad. The comments scrolled fast. Some kind. Some cruel. Some skeptical. This feels staged. Why does everything have to be about race? That dad looks uncomfortable. Darren closed the app. His hands shook. By lunch, his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Unknown numbers. Texts from coworkers. One message from a local reporter asking for a comment. Darren ignored them all. He went back to work, hands deep in an engine, trying to focus on something solid. But even there, people stared. Must be nice, someone muttered. Darren pretended not to hear. That evening, he picked Isaiah up from school. The teacher smiled too brightly. You're famous now, she joked. Darren forced a laugh. Just trying to be a dad. Isaiah climbed into the car. Everyone keeps asking about the restaurant. Darren started the engine. What do you tell them? Isaiah shrugged. That I was hungry. Darren laughed despite himself. At home, Darren pulled the card from his pocket and placed it on the table. Leonard Hale. Simple. Plain. A phone number. Darren stared at it for a long time. Then he turned it face down. Across town, Leonard sat in his office overlooking the harbor. The video played on his screen, muted. His assistant hovered nearby. PR wants to know if you'd like to respond. Leonard shook his head. No. They're framing it as a statement, she said. It wasn't, Leonard replied. It was a moment. He leaned back. The world can argue about it if it wants. What about the man? She asked. The father. Leonard smiled faintly. That's up to him. Darren didn't sleep much that night. He lay awake listening to the radiator knock, thoughts racing. He hated the attention, hated the way people assumed he wanted saving. He'd worked 2 jobs for years, missed weekends, learned how to braid hair from YouTube videos because Isaiah's mom wasn't around anymore. No one had filmed that. By morning, he'd decided. He would pretend none of this mattered. The next few days, he avoided the noise. He didn't answer calls, didn't comment online, didn't tell anyone at work more than he had to. When Isaiah asked about Leonard, Darren changed the subject. It was just a nice dinner, he said. That's all. Isaiah nodded, but he watched his dad closely. Kids noticed when adults lied to themselves. On Friday, Darren stopped at a grocery store after work. The cashier looked at him for a second too long. You're that guy, she said. Darren sighed. I'm just a guy. She smiled. Well, you seemed like a good one. He nodded and left. Outside, he sat in his car longer than necessary. He felt exposed, like his life had been pulled into the open without permission. That night, he called his sister. You should call him, she said immediately. No, Darren replied. I don't need favors. It doesn't have to be a favor, she said. It could be a conversation. Darren rubbed his face. I don't belong in his world. There was a pause on the line. Darren, she said gently. You already were. That's why it happened. He hung up soon after. Sunday afternoon, Darren took Isaiah to the park. Kids ran past. Parents chatted on benches. Normal life. Isaiah climbed the jungle gym, laughing. Darren watched, trying to breathe. A man sat down beside him. Crazy week, huh? The man said. Darren glanced over. It was a dad from Isaiah's school. Yeah, Darren replied. The man nodded. My kid asked why some people get help and others don't. Darren stiffened. What did you tell him? Darren asked. That sometimes help shows up when you least expect it, the man said. And it doesn't mean you're weak. Darren looked out at the playground. He hadn't thought of it that way. That night, after Isaiah fell asleep, Darren stood in the kitchen again. The card still sat on the table, face down. He picked it up, turned it over. He didn't dial, but he didn't put it away either. On Monday morning, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a short note. Darren, no pressure. No expectations. Just coffee if you want. Leonard. Darren read it twice, then sat down heavily. This wasn't about the internet. It wasn't about money. It was about being seen and deciding what to do with that. He looked down the hallway toward Isaiah's room, toward the life he'd built quietly, carefully. The choice pressed in on him now. Ignore it and keep things as they were, or step forward and risk being misunderstood all over again. Darren folded the note slowly. Whatever he chose next would shape more than just his own life. And he could feel it, the moment of denial was ending. Darren didn't call right away. He carried the note in his jacket for 2 days, folding and unfolding it like it might change its meaning. Every time he reached for his phone, his hand stopped short. Coffee turns into favors. Favors turn into debt. That's what he told himself. But on Wednesday morning, after dropping Isaiah at school, Darren sat in his car and stared at the steering wheel until the world felt too small to ignore. He dialed. They met at a diner near the inner harbor. Nothing fancy. Vinyl booths. Strong coffee. A chalkboard menu with smudged letters. Leonard was already there, sitting by the window. No suit. Just a sweater and jeans. He stood when Darren walked in. You came. Darren nodded. I said I might. Leonard smiled. I'm glad you did. They shook hands and sat. A waitress poured coffee without asking. Thanks for meeting me, Leonard said. Darren wrapped his hands around the mug. I didn't want this to turn into something it wasn't. Leonard nodded. Neither did I. They sat in silence for a moment, watching boats move slowly through the harbor. I won't pretend I understand what this past week has been like for you, Leonard said. But I know what it's like to have your life narrated by strangers. Darren gave a short laugh. Didn't think billionaires had that problem. Leonard smiled. Different scale. Same noise. Darren looked at him carefully. You didn't owe us anything, Darren said. That night. I know, Leonard replied. I didn't do it because I owed you. I did it because I recognized something. What? Darren asked. Leonard paused. Restraint. Darren frowned. That doesn't sound like a compliment. It is, Leonard said. It's the weight people carry when they're trying to protect someone. Darren looked down at his coffee. They talked for nearly an hour. About work. About kids. About Baltimore. Leonard didn't ask for Darren's story outright. He let it come out in pieces. Isaiah's mom leaving. The long hours. The careful budgeting. Leonard listened. Really listened. No advice. No pity. Just attention. When they stood to leave, Leonard said, There's something I want to ask you. Darren stiffened. Here it comes. Leonard smiled. Not what you think. He handed Darren a flyer. A school fundraiser. Career day. They asked me to speak, Leonard said. But I don't want to do it alone. Darren blinked. Why me? Leonard shrugged. Because kids don't need another success story. They need a real one. Darren shook his head. I don't belong on a stage. Leonard nodded. That's why you should be there. Darren said no. First. But Isaiah found the flyer later that night. You're going to my school? Isaiah asked, eyes wide. Maybe, Darren said. Isaiah smiled. That would be cool. That settled it. Career day arrived on a bright Friday morning. The gym buzzed with noise. Kids fidgeted. Parents lined the walls with phones out. Darren stood near the bleachers, hands in his pockets. Leonard walked up beside him. You good? Darren nodded. I think so. Leonard leaned in. If you want to leave, we leave. Darren shook his head. No. Let's do it. They were introduced together. Leonard spoke first. About business. About failure. About luck. Then he handed the mic to Darren. The room felt too big. Darren swallowed. I fix buses, he said. A few kids giggled. That means, Darren continued, when your ride to school breaks down, I help get it moving again. The giggles stopped. I'm also a dad, he said. That's the hardest job I've ever had. Isaiah beamed from the front row. Darren spoke simply. About showing up. About doing what needs doing. When he finished, the applause surprised him. It was loud. Real. Afterward, parents approached him. Not for pictures. For conversations. Leonard watched from a distance. Something warm settling in his chest. This was why he'd asked. The next weeks blurred. Darren and Leonard crossed paths more often. Community events. School meetings. Coffee. It wasn't planned. It just happened. They didn't talk about money. They talked about responsibility. About legacy. About what it costs to stay decent in a world that rewards noise. Isaiah grew comfortable around Leonard. Asked questions. Told jokes. Leonard listened like each word mattered. One evening, after a school meeting ran late, Darren and Leonard walked to the parking lot together. You've changed, Leonard said. Darren laughed. In a month. Leonard nodded. You stand taller. Darren looked away. I'm still the same guy. Maybe, Leonard said. But you're letting people see you now. Darren stopped walking. That's what scares me, he said. Leonard turned to face him. Why? Because seeing turns into expectations, Darren said. And expectations turn into pressure. Leonard nodded slowly. That's true. So why do you keep stepping into it? Darren asked. Leonard thought for a moment. Because hiding costs more. Darren absorbed that. That night, Darren lay awake again. But this time, his thoughts weren't racing. They were steady, clear. He thought about Isaiah's smile in the gym. about being asked, not rescued, about the doors that might open, and the ones that might close. The next morning Leonard called. "I have an idea," he said. Darren exhaled. "I was afraid you'd say that." Leonard chuckled. "Just hear me out." Darren listened, and with every sentence, the ground beneath him felt less familiar. Because this wasn't about charity. It wasn't about headlines. It was about stepping into something bigger than either of them. Darren ended the call quietly. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. If he said yes, there would be no going back. And somewhere deep down, he knew the next choice he made would change everything. Leonard's idea stayed with Darren all day. It followed him through work, through traffic, through dinner. It sat in the room like an extra chair no one mentioned. Isaiah noticed first. "You're quiet," he said, pushing peas around his plate. "I'm thinking," Darren replied. "About good stuff or bad stuff?" Darren smiled faintly. "About big stuff." Isaiah nodded like that made sense. Big stuff takes time. It always amazed Darren how his son could land on truth without trying. Later that night, after Isaiah fell asleep, Darren sat alone at the kitchen table. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the distant sound of a siren outside. Baltimore never fully slept. Leonard's words replayed in his head. A training program. Paid. Union-backed. Pathway. Not charity. Opportunity. Leonard had been careful with the language. Darren had noticed that. But language didn't erase fear. Darren had learned early on that hope could be dangerous. Hope made you reach. Reaching made you fall. He'd watched his mother chase promises that never came through. Watched men talk big and disappear faster. Darren had survived by keeping his world small. Predictable. Safe. This idea threatened that. The next morning, Darren met Leonard again. Same diner. Same booth. "I need to understand something," Darren said before Leonard could speak. Leonard nodded. "Ask." "Why me?" Darren asked. "Really?" Leonard didn't answer right away. He stirred his coffee slowly. "Because you're trusted," he said finally. Darren frowned. "By who?" Leonard met his eyes. "By people who don't trust easily." Darren looked away. "That doesn't mean I'm ready," Darren said. "I know," Leonard replied. "This isn't about readiness. It's about honesty." "About what?" Darren asked. Leonard leaned forward. "About what you want Isaiah to see when he's older." That landed hard. Darren drove home in silence. He parked, sat, and rested his forehead against the steering wheel. What did he want Isaiah to see? A man who stayed where it was safe, or a man who stepped forward, even when his hands shook? He hated that it felt like a test. That afternoon, Darren's sister stopped by. "You look tired," she said, dropping onto the couch. "I am." She studied him. "You didn't call him back, did you?" "I met him." Her eyebrows rose. "And," Darren sighed, "he wants me involved in something big." She smiled slowly. "That scares you?" "Yes. That's how I know it matters," she said. Darren rubbed his face. "What if I mess it up?" She shrugged. "You mess up fixing engines sometimes. You fix those too." He laughed softly. "That's different." "Is it?" she asked. The unraveling didn't come all at once. Came in small moments. Isaiah bringing home a permission slip Darren couldn't afford last year, but could now. A coworker asking how to apply for the new training program Leonard mentioned publicly, without using Darren's name. A neighbor thanking Darren for speaking at the school, saying her son hadn't stopped talking about it. Each moment pulled at the careful walls Darren had built. One night, Darren found himself standing in Isaiah's doorway, watching him sleep. The boy's chest rose and fell steadily. Peaceful. Darren thought about the nights he'd gone to bed hungry as a kid, about the shame that came with it, about how hard he'd worked to make sure Isaiah never felt that, and how, sometimes, protection could turn into limitation. Darren sat on the edge of the bed. "I'm trying," he whispered. The breaking point came the following week. A news segment aired about the restaurant night again, this time with commentary. Panel debated motives, optics, intent. They spoke about Darren like he wasn't a person, like he was a symbol. Isaiah walked into the room and saw his dad on the screen. "Daddy," he said, confused. "Why are they talking about you?" Darren turned off the TV. He felt something crack open in his chest. "This isn't who I am," he said quietly. But he wasn't sure that was true anymore. That night, Darren called Leonard. "I don't want to be a story," Darren said as soon as Leonard answered. "I know," Leonard replied. "Neither do I." "Then why does this keep growing?" Darren asked. Leonard paused. "Because people are hungry for examples they can touch." "That's not my job," Darren said. Leonard was quiet for a moment. "No," he said, "but it might be your calling." Darren closed his eyes. "I can't carry everyone," he said. Leonard's voice softened. "You don't have to. Just don't drop yourself." They met the next day at the harbor. Wind cut across the water. Gulls cried overhead. Leonard showed Darren the plans. Modest, thoughtful, built to last. No spotlight on Darren's face. No speeches required. Just work. Just presence. Just consistency. Darren studied the pages. He saw himself in the margins, in the fine print, in the responsibility. His hands trembled slightly. "This changes things," Darren said. "Yes," Leonard replied. "It will." "And if I say no?" Leonard nodded. "Then we shake hands, and I'll still respect you." Darren looked up. "You mean that?" Leonard met his gaze. "Completely. That mattered more than anything else." Darren took a long breath. "I need time," he said. Leonard smiled. "Take it." They stood there a moment longer. Two men from different worlds, tied together by one unexpected night. That evening, Darren cooked dinner slowly. He didn't rush. Isaiah chatted about school, about a book he wanted. "Daddy?" Isaiah said. "Are you scared?" Darren paused. "A little." "That's okay," Isaiah said. "You're brave anyway." Darren's throat tightened. After Isaiah went to bed, Darren sat alone again. But this time he didn't feel cornered. He felt open, raw, like something old was peeling away. He knew the choice was coming, and he knew it would hurt no matter what he decided. Because once you see what's possible, you can't unsee it. And Darren was standing right at the edge, about to step into a life that would ask more of him than he had ever given before. The decision didn't come with clarity. Came with pressure. Darren felt it everywhere. At work, at home, even in silence. The more he tried to ignore it, the louder it grew. He hadn't said yes, but he hadn't said no either. And that space in between was starting to crack. At the depot, a supervisor pulled him aside. "Hey," the man said carefully. "HR wants to talk to you." Darren's stomach tightened. "About what?" The supervisor shrugged. "Just protocol." The room they brought him into was small, too clean. A woman from HR sat across from him with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We've had some inquiries," she said. "Inquiries?" Darren repeated. "From outside organizations," she continued. "About your availability, your future plans." Darren leaned back. "I work here." "Yes," she said quickly. "And we value that. But we need to know if your focus is shifting." There it was. The cost. "I haven't made any changes," Darren said. She nodded. "We just need reassurance." Darren left the room feeling like the floor had tilted. That afternoon, he picked Isaiah up early and took him for ice cream. A small place near their apartment. Plastic chairs. Sticky tables. Isaiah licked chocolate off his spoon. "You look sad." "I'm okay," Darren said automatically. Isaiah frowned. "You always say that." Darren paused. "I'm just trying to do the right thing," he said. "For who?" Isaiah asked. Darren didn't answer. The call came that night. Leonard's voice was calm, but direct. "There's a delay," he said. "The board wants to move faster." Darren closed his eyes. "I told you I needed time." "I know," Leonard said. "I pushed back. But I need to know where you stand." Darren felt heat rise in his chest. "Everyone needs something from me," he said. "And no one's asking what it costs." Leonard was quiet. That's fair, he said. Tell me. Darren exhaled hard. It costs my job, my stability, my quiet. Leonard didn't interrupt. It costs my son wondering why people suddenly look at us differently, Darren continued. It costs me being the guy who just fixes buses. Leonard took a breath. I never wanted to take that from you. I know, Darren said. But intention doesn't stop impact. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Leonard spoke. If this hurts you, we stop. Darren laughed once, sharp. It's already hurting. That night, Darren slept on the couch. Not because he was tired, but because he needed space from his own thoughts. Around 2 a.m., he woke to the sound of Isaiah standing nearby. You okay? Isaiah whispered. Darren sat up. What are you doing up? Isaiah shrugged. Bad dream. Darren opened his arms. Isaiah climbed in. They sat there in the dark. I don't like when people argue about you, Isaiah said quietly. Darren's chest tightened. Who's arguing? At school, Isaiah said. Some kids say you're famous. Some say you're not. Darren swallowed. What do you think? Isaiah rested his head against Darren's shoulder. I think you're my dad. Darren closed his eyes. That almost broke him. The breaking point came 2 days later. A reporter showed up at the depot. Camera crew. Microphone. Darren saw them from across the yard. His heart dropped. The supervisor rushed over. We didn't approve this. The reporter spotted Darren anyway. Darren Cole, she called out. Just a quick question. No, Darren said firmly. She kept walking. Is it true you're partnering with Leonard Hale on a new initiative? I said no, Darren repeated. The camera zoomed in. Darren turned away, but the damage was done. That evening, Darren received an email. Subject line, position under review. He stared at the screen for a long time. They hadn't fired him. Not yet. But the message was clear. He sat at the kitchen table, hands clenched. Everything he'd worked for felt like it was slipping. He called Leonard. I'm done, Darren said. I can't do this. Leonard didn't argue. I hear you, he said. I wanted to help, Darren continued. But I can't lose everything. You won't, Leonard said. Darren laughed bitterly. You don't know that. Leonard paused. You're right. I don't. That honesty landed heavy. I'll step back, Leonard said. Publicly. Completely. That won't undo it, Darren said. No, Leonard agreed. But it might slow it. Darren sank into his chair. I didn't ask for any of this, he said. I know, Leonard replied. And I'm sorry. That was the first time Leonard had said it like that. Not as a gesture, as a truth. After the call, Darren sat alone. The apartment felt smaller than ever. He thought about quitting, about running, about shrinking back into invisibility. He thought about Isaiah's words. I think you're my dad. Was that enough? Or was there more he owed? To himself? The next morning, Darren walked Isaiah to school. They stood at the gate longer than usual. Are you mad? Isaiah asked. No, Darren said. I'm just thinking. Isaiah nodded. Thinking is okay. Darren watched him walk inside. Then he turned and made a decision. Not a loud one, a quiet one. Darren showed up at Leonard's office unannounced. The assistant looked surprised but let him through. Leonard stood when Darren entered. You didn't have to come, Leonard said. I did, Darren replied. He took a breath. I can't be your symbol, Darren said. I can't be your headline. Leonard nodded. Understood. But, Darren continued, I also can't go back to pretending this didn't happen. Leonard waited. I'll do the work, Darren said. On my terms. Quietly. No cameras. No speeches. Leonard's eyes softened. And if it costs me? Darren added. Then at least it's my choice. Leonard stood there for a moment. Then he extended his hand. Then we do it right, he said. Darren shook it. That night, Darren stood by Isaiah's bed again. You're brave, Isaiah mumbled, half asleep. Darren smiled sadly. I'm trying. But deep down, he knew something else. The choice he'd just made wouldn't protect him from loss. It would invite it, because standing up, even quietly, always does. And whatever came next wouldn't be gentle. It would test him, strip him, force him to decide who he really was. When everything he'd built was finally on the line, the work began quietly. No announcements, no press, no speeches, just empty rooms, folding chairs, and people who showed up because someone told them it mattered. Darren stood in the back of a community center on the east side of Baltimore, watching the first group file in. Men and women from the city transit system, a few younger faces, a few older ones who had been overlooked for years. No one knew his name here. That was how he wanted it. Leonard kept his distance. He funded the space, handled the paperwork, then stepped aside. True to his word, Darren ran the room, not with confidence but with honesty. "I don't have fancy words," he told them. "I know machines, and I know how hard it is to keep going when no one's watching." Heads nodded. The room leaned in. The program grew slowly. One night a week became two. Two became three. People stayed late, asked questions, took notes. Darren learned something he hadn't expected. He liked teaching, not the spotlight, the sharing. He saw himself in the faces across from him, the quiet hope, the fear of failing again. After each session, he drove home exhausted but lighter. At home, Isaiah noticed the change. "You smile more," he said one night. Darren laughed. "Do I?" "Yeah," Isaiah said. "Even when you're tired." Darren hugged him a little tighter. The reckoning didn't come as drama. Came as consequence. One Monday morning, Darren was called into the depot office again. This time there were two supervisors, and a printed notice on the table. "We've decided to let you go," one of them said. Darren nodded slowly. No shouting, no argument. He'd known this was coming. They talked about procedure, about benefits. Darren barely heard it. As he stood to leave, one supervisor hesitated. "For what it's worth," the man said quietly, "my brother signed up for your program." Darren looked at him. "He says it's the first time someone explained things without making him feel small." Darren nodded. "Thank you." Then he walked out. He sat in his car for a long time, hands on the wheel, breathing. Fear washed over him, but it didn't drown him. He felt something else too. Relief. That evening, Darren told Isaiah the truth. "I don't work at the depot anymore," he said. Isaiah looked up from his homework. "Are we okay?" Darren swallowed. "We will be." Isaiah nodded. "Okay." Just like that. No panic. No questions. Trust. Leonard called later that night. "I heard," he said. Darren didn't soften it. "I lost my job." Leonard sighed. "I'm sorry." Darren sat at the table. "I don't regret it." Leonard was quiet. "That's how I know you're ready," Leonard said. "For what?" Darren asked. Leonard took a breath. "For this to become something permanent." Darren closed his eyes. "I can't be dependent on you," he said. "You won't be," Leonard replied. "You'll be in charge." That scared Darren more than anything else. Weeks passed. Money got tight. Darren sold his old watch, cut expenses, but the program kept growing. Word spread. Not online. By mouth. People showed up early, stayed late. They fixed engines, learned systems, shared meals. The room filled with purpose. One night, after everyone left, Darren stayed behind. He sat alone in the empty room, folding chairs stacked, whiteboard erased. He thought about the man he'd been before that dinner, the one who stayed small to stay safe. He hadn't disappeared, but he wasn't in control anymore. The reckoning came fully on a cold Thursday morning. Leonard invited Darren to his office, not for plans, for truth. "I'm stepping back," Leonard said. Darren frowned. "From what?" "From this," Leonard replied. "From funding it." Darren's heart dropped. "Why?" Leonard held his gaze. "Because it can't be mine if it's going to last." Darren stood. "Then it dies." Leonard shook his head. "No, it becomes yours." Darren laughed, sharp and scared. "With what money?" Leonard slid a folder across the desk. Grants, partnerships, city backing, all in Darren's name. You already earned it, Leonard said. I just opened the door. Darren stared at the papers. This wasn't help. It was responsibility. Darren went home that night numb. Isaiah sat on the couch reading. You okay? Isaiah asked. Darren sat beside him. I think everything's about to change. Isaiah smiled softly. It already did. Darren leaned back and closed his eyes. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like weight, the kind you train for. But late that night, Darren's phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered. Mr. Cole, a voice said. This is the city council office. We need to talk. Darren's stomach tightened. About what? About the program, the voice replied. And your role in it. The line went quiet. Darren stared at the phone. The reckoning wasn't over. It was only shifting. And whatever came next wouldn't just test his courage. It would decide whether everything he'd built would stand, or be taken away. The meeting with the city council wasn't dramatic. No raised voices. No grand speeches. Just a long table, paper folders, and people who had already made up their minds before Darren sat down. That was what scared him most. He wore the same jacket he'd worn to work for years. Clean, simple, familiar. Mr. Cole, the chairwoman said, adjusting her glasses. Thank you for coming. Darren nodded. Thank you for having me. They asked questions. How long had the program been running? Who funded it? What were the outcomes? Darren answered plainly. No buzzwords. No promises he couldn't keep. I'm not here to scale something fast, he said. I'm here to build something steady. The room went quiet. Someone scribbled notes. After an hour, the chairwoman closed her folder. We've reviewed the numbers, she said, and we've spoken to participants. Darren waited. We'd like to offer the program city support, she continued. A long-term lease on the space. Workforce funding. Darren felt his chest tighten. But, she added, only if you're willing to lead it. Darren didn't answer right away. He thought of the depot. Of Isaiah at the kitchen table. Of the man he'd been when he didn't believe he was allowed to take up space. Yes, he said quietly. I am. The program got a name a week later. Not after a donor. Not after a company. They called it Second Shift. Because that's what it was built for, the hours after work, after life, when people still showed up. Leonard attended the opening. He stood in the back. No speech. No introduction. When Darren caught his eye, Leonard nodded once. That was enough. Isaiah helped Darren hang the sign. He stood on a chair, holding it steady. Straight? Isaiah asked. Perfect, Darren said. Isaiah stepped down and admired it. You did this. Darren smiled. We did. The months that followed were full. Busy. Hard. Honest. Darren worked more than he ever had. But it felt different now. The weight made sense. People graduated the program. Got jobs. Brought their kids by to say thank you. Darren learned names. Stories. Losses. He learned how to lead without pretending he had all the answers. One evening, Leonard and Darren sat at the same diner where they'd first talked. Same booth. Same coffee. You look settled, Leonard said. Darren laughed. I feel tired. Leonard smiled. That's usually the sign. They sat in comfortable silence. I won't always be around, Leonard said eventually. Darren nodded. I know. And you don't need me to be, Leonard added. Darren met his eyes. Thank you for stepping back when it mattered. Leonard's voice was soft. Thank you for stepping forward. Later that night, Darren took Isaiah out to dinner. Not Harbor and Pine. A neighborhood place with bright lights and loud laughter. Isaiah ordered without hesitation. Darren watched him eat, easy and unafraid. The waiter brought the check and set it down. Darren picked it up, paid it. No eyes on him. No moment. Just a man paying for dinner. And somehow that felt like everything. As they walked home, Isaiah slipped his hand into Darren's. You happy? Isaiah asked. Darren thought about it. Yes, he said. I am. Isaiah nodded, satisfied. They walked on under the streetlights, their shadows stretching ahead of them. Not small, not hidden, just moving forward, together. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed the story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.